transcribed audio to start showing up. And here we are. Fast forwarding through future. We have been in the deep jungle in the beginning. We moved into the medieval times. Then we went towards the 1940s and 50s, and now we have arrived in modern day. And this modern day project is all about you guys taking on Pixar style artwork and finding when we think of Pixar, you can think of Hey Arnold. There's a lot of different options out there for how we can do this. I think this is a Hey Arnold background, but there's another caveat to this project. So you guys are also going to be creating a parallax effect within your scenes. First one I opened up was a WebMP file. So here we go. This is what we're looking at. You can think of like Justice League Unlimited. You could do, I don't think that the Batman show really works because that's more like 1940s and 50s or like kind of, I'm sorry, 30s with the art noir style. Really what we want to be thinking of here is Pixar, any kind of modern animated TV show that takes place during modern times. And assigning a parallax effect to that. A great way to think of the parallax effect is if any of you all have ever seen a Roku television before, and on the Roku TVs, they've got a scrolling city scene with like giant robots and sort of a Godzilla-like monster that comes out, and the far background is moving much slower than the objects within the foreground. So here's some Pixar concept art. I thought this one was really interesting here with the way that they went through and very, very loosely rendered these flowers with just a couple brush strokes. And you can see that the layering is there. Also, the interest that's going on within the tree. But one of the important things that you guys are going to have to figure out with this assignment and something that we've been leading towards with the other projects is how to create a modern environment that is completely oversaturated with details and to distill that down into just the important marks. I think this particular picture here does a great job of doing that. As we start to look at some of the details within this space, there's a lot of stuff that our brain is reading for a complex city scene. However, check out this traffic light here. We've got the outline of a traffic light and just a couple little marks on the inside of us to give us the impression. They're not spending all of their time rendering every little detail within this space. Same thing goes for these buildings within the background. You can see how loose they start to become. City signage, when you're doing a modern scene, whether it's a suburbia or some type of urban area, or just outside of a dense urban environment, sort of like the suburbs, or any kind of local strip mall that you might have around you, there's going to be a lot of signage, and figuring out a way to be able to creatively and beautifully design that signage without having to go through and make every single letter form is going to be super important for this project. So this was that Pixar film where it's like the gosh, I can't even remember the name of it, where they find like the dad, and the dad is like half a person. It's just his lower legs for the majority of the movie.
Oh,
And he's
Onward.
Onward. Thank you. Yeah, very, very forgettable Pixar movie, I think, in 20 years. But, anywho, here was some concept art for that. And I think they do a great job of, this stone wall within this sort of modern landscape, really simplifying these things down to just their base elements. But still, when we zoom back, the overall feeling of the space comes through in a really, really nice way. Here's some more concept art from Onward. This is something that you could totally use for the Parallax project. We just need to add some camera movement to it. So this is really nice, the way that they've rendered the buildings within the background here. You can see that the castle type elements are coming through. However, it still reads as a modern skyscraper metropolis. They've got the atmospheric perspective is taking place. So you can see that the colors are becoming less saturated, and there's not really any blacks back here. Please don't forget about the atmospheric perspective within this project. And I thought that they did a really, really nice job with all of the signage in here without, you can see how overwhelming it can become. So this quick little convenience mark or supermarket, all of a sudden, it's got an entryway, it's got an overhang to it. It does have some poster and print material on the door. However, they are simplifying these details to where it is they really want you to look. Same thing goes with the gas station sign, right? You could spend all day trying to place in perspective or place in perspective the numbers on the gas station, the actual signage, you could get completely lost in this stuff. And instead, they're distilling the details down into just what the viewer needs so that when we step back and look at this thing, it looks like a busy city environment, complete with really nice little paint and scratch marks along the painted curves. Don't forget about all those details on streets as well. There's a lot more of them than you think of, and you probably have loaded into your own brains. Notice how a street curve has got multiple paint sections. It's got little bits of grass that are sticking out of it. We've got a ramp going down here, the curvature of the ramp, where the cuts in the sidewalk actually are. There's a gutter space between the sidewalk and where the asphalt actually begins. We've got crosswalk markings. There's going to be, bushes and things that are growing there. When it comes to any kind of street light and whatnot. You've got the crosswalk signs as well. There's going to be a button section, and all of these objects that we see and interact with every day. You're going to realize if you don't use references to do this project, how little of these details you actually have memorized for what our world looks like nowadays. Okay. So here are a couple different examples of the camera movements that you are able to create with the parallax effect that's going to work well. Notice none of these involve a camera rotation. A camera rotation would be if you're holding like your camera on your cell phone, and all of a sudden you start to spin around in 360 while you're taking a video. We do not want that camera rotating at all. Yes, you can pan across like you're doing a panoramic shot. You can do a tilt shot where you're panning the camera up and down as well. You can zoom the camera with this project, and you can do a dolly shot where it's sort of rolling in as well. But you do not want to rotate the camera at all. Now, the cool part about this is that you can make the parallax effect with any combination of these four shots. So if you want your shot to, for a little ways, kind of tilt over and go from left to right, and then all of a sudden go down at one point, the parallax effect will still work no problem. If you want to create a zoom and then all of a sudden pan down after you zoom in on a section of your scene, the parallax effect will still work within your shot and it's going to be successful. You're not going to have any trouble with that. You just cannot rotate the camera. I hope that starts to make sense. It'll make more sense once we get inside of After Effects. This is absolutely, I'll probably break this into two videos once we step into After Effects so that you don't have to listen to me do all this intro stuff first, and we can get into the actual bare bones of what we're creating. But I think that this is going to give you a very good idea of what this project is going to be. This is a really nice looking flower shop here as well. Notice they've got all these details out front. However, they are not getting lost in drawing every single rose petal on these flowers. They're keeping it extremely simple throughout. And this is where I want you guys to live at, is in this kind of space, because the accumulation of all these tight little small details is really going to become a lot for you very quick within this project. Here is another good example of a more rendered cityscape. Again, this might break some of your hands to be able to do this, but you could set this up with the parallax scrolling left to right, no problem with some of the buildings moving at different paces, and it should look pretty neat once you actually get something like that completed. So for these buildings, if you decide to do a zoom through a city street like this, it becomes a little bit trickier because as we start to zoom in, we want these buildings, the buildings in the foreground, to move faster than the buildings within the background. And you really have to think about how you're cutting these up into various cards along the way. The road is going to need to be cut up as well. And it just becomes a little bit trickier. It works a lot better if we've got hills and divots on the other side of those hills to be able to mask where the transitions are actually at within these shots. It's a little bit complicated. Please let me know if you're thinking about doing something like this to be able to get it to work accurately. I'm here to help, and I hate to see you bite off more than you can chew on these particular projects. It can be done. It's just a little tricky. And just a couple more things to consider. That one is super small, but pretty neat. I like that they're still including some shadows. These images are super, super tiny. All right, cool. So I wanted to include this one within here. As an example, I think the colors are really cool, and they did a great job working with those buttery yellows. But then at the same time, they've got some tans, but the tans have got purples on the inside of them. So these street walls, you can see just how much they can come to life when you really start to render them and consider the shadows within these spaces. On the backside of the tan buttery yellow, they are using a purple shadow, and just how beautiful that looks. The purple shadow isn't just staying purple though. It's got some blues, it's got some purples, it's got some tans in there, and it's a really, really beautifully rendered wall space. The other thing about it beyond the shadows is just how many other details are going on with this wall as well. And if you try to draw something like this, again, we're doing like modern day Pixar urban environments or outside urban environment spaces, sort of like strip malls and that types of thing. And you can see that they've got the exterior air conditionings that are attached here, the bars over the windows, exposed electrical wires. They've got, the cityscape itself. The buildings are broken up into different areas. So we've got a base layer here that's one color. We've got a dividing line that's a different color moving above that on the building on the right-hand side. It's got sort of a pseudo column that is divided up and has got some interest to it. Graffiti on the wall is a great element to add into these shots as well. If you were going to do a night shot for this project, I think that you're going to find it to be pretty difficult for you. And there's a lot more to doing like a Tokyo downtown night shot than you think there is. It is completely overwhelmed with signage, and to be able to really fill that space, you've got to dedicate the next portion of your life to really making that thing sing and making it come to life. So if that's what you're thinking, like Vegas or neon Tokyo at night or 80s synthwave looking city, that style is a lot more complex than you think it is, and the examples that I'm showing you right now are manageable and you can get through them. So this is one that I used directly for a reference on a previous project that I've done, where I started in the background of one of these urban spaces. So if you're feeling like, oh, that's kind of boring, I'm not really interested in it, tell a story. Start off in a treehouse and then have the camera pan down from the treehouse. You can see the buildings within the background, and then sort of move across the space. The total length of these shots should be about 10 to 15 seconds long. We really don't want them any longer than that. So 10 to 15 seconds for the video. You guys are going to be turning in an MP4 at the end here. No MOV files, no AVI files, MP4 files with an H.264 codecs on it. If you don't know what that means, I'll explain that to you here in just a little bit. More on that once we get inside of After Effects. Here's another really, really cool looking one when it comes to the cityscapes. I thought that this one was really nice, and it definitely feels modern. Great job with adding the details in there. It could probably use a little bit more print work and a little bit more city details, but notice how they rendered the street, right? So instead of just having a boring brown gray street, we've got purples, we've got yellows, we've got tans coming together to build this space with a textured brush, and it turned out looking really, really beautiful. So on each one of these rocks, the shadow, instead of just being brown on the outside of it, ends up having a little bit of a purple tint to it. And you can see how nice that looks overall. The other details with the clothes being, strung out look really, really nice. The rest of the world, definitely the shops at night are going to be closed with these garage doors over the front of them. These garage doors oftentimes get graffiti on them also, but this is one that could, it's going to have a little bit of trouble doing the parallax effect because of the one point perspective that we're seeing here. This has got a little bit more perspective line to it, but it's still going to be a little bit tricky for you, and you got to divide up these buildings accordingly for it to work the right way. So, oh, what's this one? There's my camera movements again. Okay, so here's some more cool outside shots for this project. We're doing an urban environment or the outskirts of an urban area. So sort of just outside of the metropolis zone. And think San Francisco, Charleston, South Carolina, Louisiana are all great places to set this project. Like I was saying, you can start in the backyard. You can start, inside of a diner and move from inside to outside the diner, or do a zoom going out the diner window into something that's occurring. But keep in mind, that you likely do not have any references for inside of your brain for how these buildings are constructed. You guys are not architecture students. You've never drawn a building like this before, I would guess, in your entire lives. When we look at this set of buildings, each one of them is different. They've got their own window plans, their own frames going around the windows. So if we look at this window frame over on the right-hand side, and then we look at this window frame on the left-hand side, the windows are constructed completely different. So it doesn't mean that you need to create all your windows frames exactly the same. You can see all the extra details that they're adding around the window space as well, just to give it a little bit more interest. And this is becoming really, really beautiful. Now, if you go in there and you try and render every single one of these details, I don't think you're going to get this project finished. You might have two buildings that look really, really nice, but we've got to figure out a way to be able to simplify this detail to where we're giving the illusion of a large amount of detail. The other thing that a lot of you guys are going to have trouble with is when these buildings touch the ground. All right, when we get to the ground, a lot of you guys have got, oh, look at all the exposed wires that are going on with this building as well. There's a lot of little stuff that our brains just don't register when we're looking at these things. And that's what I'm asking you guys to do is really get in there and start studying those details on these types of buildings. So down here, you can see all the beautiful brickwork that's going on in the base of this structure. This one's got some type of fence in front of it. Thank God for that. But also, please, within these spaces, do not forget about, urban foliage. It doesn't just don't just get focused on the buildings. Also think about the way that nature is creeping back into these spaces. The little plants that manage to get up in between the cracks in the cement. City trees are really kind of your best friend. They can save you a lot of time for stuff that you need to render and can really help you out. Bob's Burgers, another great example of a modern day show. And what do you know? Within the shot, we've got a city tree that's going on. We've got the mailbox. I love this, that this tree over here on the left-hand side is a different age. So it's just been planted and it's just starting to grow in there. I'm not sure why that one's got a little fence going around it. That's pretty funny. But I think they do reference that little fence around the tree in the TV show. And yeah, so check out some of the other stuff that's going on, even within this simplified. I would consider this maybe more simplified. It looks like it, but they still have all the extra details. So they've got the electrical boxes over on the left-hand side here, right? They've got the exposed wiring. Just look how much detail they've included in Bob's Burgers' actual building, right? That's a beautiful building structure that his family lives up on top of the diner down below. It's actually a really, really lovely building. So is this up here. There's a lot of beauty to it. This one's got the exposed wiring. We've got the telephone poles with the wires running off the telephone poles. So, you know, I'm not the biggest fan, if you can't tell already, of just leaving the sidewalks totally gray. They've done that here, and there is some shading that's going on. However, they've chosen to leave the windows just completely blue. I guess for the blue sky it works, but I would favor more dramatic shadows and lighting within a scene any time, any day. But Bob's Burger is a good one. Here's another good example of a of a modern city environment as they're starting to move towards the wharf down at the end. If you guys have ever seen this show, it's absolutely outstanding. I think it's a celebration of normalcy and just sort of the American family unit. Here's another cool one that's a little bit more stylized. This is from Big Hero 6, where they did like Sanford, Tokyo, I think is the name of the main city in that movie. And yeah, the structures on the outside of these buildings are really, really fascinating. And I think that this is a good rendering approach here to be able to keep the rendering loose, to keep the lighting still there, so that you're not totally breaking your hand off while we're creating these. Here's a more advanced render from Big Hero 6. And this is smart because you can see in this one, they're actually using that hill that I was talking about. And the hills do a great job of being able to divide up the line. So this would totally work well for a parallax effect with this hill section here where we can't see the bottom part of the road. And that line there gives you the divide. The problem that you run into, let's look at that last Bob's Burgers one. If we did a zoom through this, trying to get the parallax effect to work, it needs to be divided up with a line at each one of these sections, and it just gets a little bit confusing for the road to actually work and for all this stuff to take place and for things to stay in the right location where they are for it to work accurately. Here's another really cool rendered example for Big Hero 6. You guys are more than welcome to do something that's more sketchy like this as well. You're welcome to do a Tokyo or a Chinese modern in suburban area, but it does need to have the addition of the telephone poles, all the city effects, bus stops, posters, signage, that type of thing, some type of storefronts in there as well. And you're going to be urban archaeologist and anthropologist going through and seeing how these cityscapes are actually made up. One other good idea on this would be to go to Google Maps and go down to the street view for some place like San Francisco, Seattle, Washington could work, going down towards the river, and really just sort of doing some sketch work from your computer on these different locations. You could do London, you could do Tokyo, you could do Thailand if you wanted to, going down the street in Thailand. But we're going to be applying this to the urban effect. This one, or sorry, with the parallax effect. So this is another cool one where it totally takes on the rendering elements from the 1940s and 50s project. It doesn't feel immediately quite as modern because we're missing the telephone poles, the signage, but it's doing a good job of rendering a complex city scene in a very simplified fashion. And you can see that they're using the offset lines that we saw from the 1940s and 50s project, choosing where to just be able to add line work, but there's still a sense of shadow and space that's happening within that environment. This one's pretty cool as well. Pretty nice. Oh, all right. So this is a cool one. If any of you guys are thinking about doing a street scene at night, I think that this one is handled exceptionally well. I would take a screen capture of this example file with the dark sort of reds, the grays, the shale colors that are happening with it. Notice that we still have the atmospheric perspective that's existing. So even as it moves further back, instead of going to totally black, we've used a night sky that's got some brightness and some middle gray to it. That's a sort of a cool blue. And that cool blue isn't just cool blue. There's a few other colors that are happening in there. So there's also sort of a tan color and mixed with the teal blue, but it works really, really nicely for giving a nice full moonlight scene. They're also using a little bit of city fog within the space down at the ground that I think is working really, really successfully. And, even though it's at night and it reads that it's at night, we've still got harsh highlights that are going on for where the moon is actually hitting these different building spaces, and it just looks grand. I think that's a really, really cool example. Oh, so here's another neat thing to think about within this project. So, we've talked about having it being outside of a city center or an urban environment. Yeah, you can do a city skyline within the background. I've done quite a few of them. They can take a little bit to make the shapes for each one of those buildings back there in the background, or you know you can also do nature as well. So you could do mountains within the background or some big green fields, or maybe there's, like they're out in Colorado or something, and this is in Boulder, and you can see all the rock formations off in the distance as well. And then maybe there's a little bit of cityscape just to give you the idea that there's some bigger ones that are starting to come up. But having a nature background within these scenes also can work really, really nicely to give you that far off distance that you're looking for. I thought this was pretty fun. So instead of chicken wings, we've got butterfly wings here. Haha, funny. Um, yeah, and this again is a really, really nice rendering. So we're already starting to introduce some of that atmospheric perspective back here, and this is top-notch, world-class stuff for this rendering that's going on, even though it's still extremely loose. Oops, I don't know what I just did. All right, I think we're at the end of the example files for now. So I'm going to switch over into Photoshop. And yeah, let's talk through the Photoshop portion of this. So while you're setting up your painting files, the important thing to remember for this project is, okay, I did not paint all this stuff. I think I downloaded this from some uh, clip art site and just assembled it all together very, very quickly in the past. But this will give you a good idea of what's going on. So your scene that you're going to be rendering is going to be 1920 by 1080 within After Effects. However, you are the artist. You know what the full scene looks like and where it is that you're going to be taking the audience within these shots. So your canvas within Photoshop that you're going to be working from is likely going to be much larger than 1920 by 1080. And this is going to allow you to be able to move the camera through the space. If you're doing a zoom shot and you're going to be zooming through these environments, zooming in or out of something, you need to take into consideration that when you are at your most zoomed level, that your shot does not become pixelated and doesn't look like it's going from 16-bit to a modern era AAA video game. It's going to look really, really tacky if you do that. So please, if you are zooming, allow for enough pixels within the shot so that it does not look pixelated and fragmented or fragged when we get too close up into the shot. But what I want to say next here is there's something that can occur within these shots, which is called seams, and you really don't want seams to occur. So this means as we are zooming out and up, oh, you see all that white stuff there at the top? You don't want any of those things to actually show within your shot. You don't want to be able to see the bottom of the telephone pole, clipping through or clipping up to where it just looks like it's not actually properly placed within the scene. So here we go. We got this car here that's just on the second level, and you'll notice that the car is on its own layer. There it is. We'll give it a color. What? Oh, go with red. Okay, so now we've got our red car. Notice that if there's any other clippage or anything like that within the shot, you're going to get, it's going to show up and it's going to be on that layer. But what I'm trying to say here is if I was to go through and paint this car within Adobe Photoshop, I would paint it just like I would anything else. I would start painting the car with my flat color and blocking in my shapes. And then from there, I would create a new layer on top of it. I would do my shadow pass, and then I would go back and I would do my highlight pass on the car. And then what you're going to end up doing is pressing Control E or Layer Merge Down, Control E on your keyboard to be able to merge your layers together to be able to get the car on one single layer so that he becomes a stamp. All right. So when we move around this layer, it is all in one position. There he goes. So now the car is back to where he wanted to be. This is another thing that you guys need to consider as well, is that you are building these files for an animated sequence, for a movie file. So that means that the telephone poles, right, if they're in the very foreground, we still need to paint the things that are behind the car. So these buildings that are behind the car, they need to be painted. The car needs to have a front on it, even if it's behind the telephone pole right at the very beginning, and you are creating these actual elements to exist within your shot. So if you got buildings way back in the background city, you can see that I've got more of my city that's actually appearing there than what it is that I'm seeing. And you need to have that stuff painted down. Otherwise, you're going to get those seams and those cracks that start to appear within your shot. So I've got a whole layer of sky back here. Normally, I would break up the clouds and the sky, but in this one, it seems like they're on the same page. And now we've got something that looks like a modern version, not a neon city light version of the Roku background, where we've got a couple different cars, we've got some cityscape, we've got a couple different layers, we've got an extreme foreground with the telephone poles, the post office stuff, we've got the cars on the street area, we've got the building scape for the city all on merged down into one layer. So again, you need to paint these things normally. And then at the end, you're going to go back and you're going to merge all this stuff together. And oh my goodness, what is this? We got some other things. It looks like there's a dinosaur, and oh my God, there's fire within the shot too. There's explosions that are taking place. It looks like we've got a little bit more rigged up into this scene than we thought there would be. So we'll see how that plays out once we move into After Effects here in just a moment. All right, I'm going to save out this shot, Haven't changed anything there. Let's stop the video. And in the next one, we're going to be taking this particular scene that is prepped and ready to go because I've merged my layers together within Photoshop into After Effects. I'm going to show you how to be able to get your scenes set up within Adobe After Effects and how to begin creating this parallax effect. It's my recommendation that you watch both of these videos before and as you're starting to concept this project so that you understand where it is that these things are heading and you can get a sense of scope for how much work you've got ahead of yourself. I'm not saying it's going to be a ton of work, but there are a couple extra steps for this one compared to doing just a flat, still non-moving background environment that you need to be aware of within the pre-planning phase. Alrighty, guys, I stopped the recording. Do y'all have